Okay, so welcome to the first session for the Adobe, and we've got the two wonderful presenters, Julieanne and Paul, Julieanne Kost and Paul Burnett, and they're going to give us an insight into some of the wizardry that you can do with the Adobe. And I will pass you on to them. The only thing that I would mention here is that we would love to get your feedback. And as I said, this is our very first, well, it's our second session. And we're still working through some technical issues behind the scenes here. So bear with us if there are some glitches along the way. We are still learning how to use the system. It's all new territory for all of us. But Julieanne and Paul are very well experienced in this environment, so hopefully this session will go very, very smoothly. Please give us some feedback at the end of the session or during the session through the chat window, and we will send you an email at the end of the session as well. We would love to hear back from you and see what you think and how we can improve and what's missing and what else, and what you think about the festival and whatever it is. So I'll pass you on now to the two wonderful presenters, and I will disappear from the scene and just enjoy listening to it. Thanks very, very much. On to you, Julieanne.
Okay, thank you so much. So hello, everyone. How are you guys doing? It's good morning or good afternoon for you guys. I'm just going to share my screen here. It is Friday evening still here. So just bear with me here while I bring up my presentation and go into full screen mode. Okay, excellent. So I can no longer see you or the chat pod, but luckily I am joined today with Paul Burnett. So if you do have questions, please feel free to enter them into the chat. And Paul, you can either, interrupt me at any time, or we can wait and I'll try to make sure that we have some time at the end that I can also answer some questions. So this is me. My name is Julieanne Kost. I work for Adobe, and I have a lot of information up on my blog. So if you want to take a screenshot of that, or however you want to get that information, it's just blogs.adobe.com/jkost. And if you want to follow me on Instagram, I'm there as well. But let's move right into today's topic, which is the creative spark. So I want to talk about how personal photographic projects or self-assignments can help you to become a better photographer. That is the goal here. But before we start, I just want to give you a really just a real short background for those of you who don't know who I am. So like I said, I work at Adobe Systems, but when I was growing up, actually, we're going to go back in time just for a moment. My parents were both very creative. So I come from a very creative household. My dad was an engineer who loved to do photography on the side. And my mom was a painter as well as a silk screener. And so both of them actually used the darkroom. Well, it was kind of a laundry room that was converted into a darkroom, but my mom needed it to expose her prints, her silk screens, so that she could make the screens and do the printing. And my father used it, of course, as an amateur photographer. So in school, I got into photography and I took some courses and I was on the yearbook staff, and all of that was really fun, but I was also an athlete. So I wanted to go to school to be a sports therapist, to help people, I guess, when they have problems with sports, or help improve their attitude. So I actually got a degree in psychology. But I kind of realized upon graduation that I really had no idea what I actually wanted to do. So fortunately, I'd taken some classes during college in photography. I'd done some summer jobs in photography, and I'd also taken on an internship. And so I used all that experience to get just a job in a 1-hour photo store. But from there, with that experience, I then got a job at a medical imaging company. And this was back in the really early 90s. And we ended up taking off of Betacam, we grabbed images on the computer, which was pretty cool for back in the early 90s. And we took off the patient's names and we color corrected them and stuff. And the reason I'm telling you all of this is because what it led me to was Photoshop. And this was back in the Photoshop 2.0 days, right? And I discovered that I absolutely loved compositing images together. So prior to this, I guess I'd done like a lot of collages just because my mom was really into the arts and there was always stuff laying around that I could play with. But doing it on the computer was really a really pretty cool thing. So I actually went back to school in photography. I got a degree. And one of my course instructors was working with Adobe. His name was Stephen Johnson. He was writing the duotone curves, and he heard that a job was available in technical support. So I actually applied for it and I got it. And it really aligned my love of helping people, so the psychology background, as well as my photography. So from technical support, I then moved on to user education. So I kind of helped with like the manuals and classroom in a book. And finally, I took this job as an evangelist. So I create now educational and hopefully maybe even inspirational content. And I just love helping people and kind of, you know, giving talks about technology, which isn't always the easiest thing to understand, and just kind of watching that light go on in people's minds. So anyway, just one last little bit about me. I'm an introvert, so photography for me personally gives me time to be alone, right? So I can kind of withdraw inside of myself and go out and take pictures and replenish my energy. And so it's just this fantastic creative outlet for me, especially because I work primarily in the world of high tech. And I really love just the challenge of making a unique photograph. And I think that has to do with the fact that when I first picked up a camera, I was a teenager. And so I'd go around with my parents and they were shooting photographs. And you know how you are kind of as a teenager, like the only thing you really want to do is not what your parents are doing. So I would try to go find, you know, unique images. But I actually think that's really helped me because a lot of times I try to go beyond the initial grab shot. Okay, so that's totally enough about me. Let's talk about self-assignments. So because I don't shoot for clients, and I don't know, some of you may not, but because I don't, I give myself assignments because, and we can call them self-assignments, you can call them personal projects, whatever you want. It's really quite interchangeable for me. But even if I did shoot for clients, I imagine that I would still need some kind of creative outlet. You know, that might not be true for all of you. I mean, some of you might be a wedding photographer and you might absolutely love shooting weddings, and that's perfectly fine. I just have not been in that situation. So anyway, so there's a lot of reasons why I give myself self-assignments, including just to slow down for me, because I'm that introvert. It's to slow down, to be present, to kind of get lost in the moment. And then of course, to explore new technologies, right? Self-assignments are a great way to improve your skills. They're a great way to challenge yourself and change your perspective and even discover like new ways of seeing things. And then I found this whole other area where it's just recording my own personal experiences that I would forget about in a year. And photography's helped me kind of be a memory aid and look back over my life. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. And of course, I love to share, you know, just a small part of the world as I experience it with other people. It also ensures that my photography continues to evolve, and a lot of my personal projects have also helped my career, which we'll take a look at in a minute too. And then they just allow me to invest in the work that I'm passionate about, because my passions might not always be completely in alignment with the work that I'm doing. Okay, and plus, you know what? They're just super rewarding, right? Like, I love doing them. They're low pressure because I make the self-assignment, I give it to myself, and then I can determine what the success of the project looks like. And I think that's really important. All right, so let's move on. So what I wish I knew years ago was this. So for self-assignments for me, you know, and look, I can only tell you what works for me, and this might not work for you. I don't know, but I do really well with structure. Right? So when I want to get a project done, the first thing I do is I try to get really organized. So I make sure that I define the project, right? I actually define it. I write it down. I break it up into little small goals that are achievable. I also limit the scope. I think that's one of the most difficult things to do, is to actually kind of rein in your project, bring it in so that it becomes manageable, so that you know what you're focusing on. and then I commit to the plan, right? And that can look very different depending on what the assignment or what the project is. But it's like the structure for me. It's this map. It's this plan that helps me to figure out the best way to move this project forward. Now, you know, with a map, it's not that you always have to go from point A to point B. You can still take detours if you want to. It's just that you can make those detours and make those choices maybe with a little bit more knowledge and background so that you don't get off track. It's not to say that your projects or assignments can't evolve. It's just that if you know you're going from A to B, that map can help you get there a little bit more quickly. Okay. The other thing that I just want to mention is that not all self-assignments and projects have the same timelines, right? So before we jump into my window seat and the passenger seat and the red thread projects, because they're all longer term projects, I mean, some of them are years, some of them are at this point decades. And that's probably because it's the work that I've been most passionate about. But I also have in-between projects, right? So maybe a better word, maybe not in between, but maybe alongside. So I usually have multiple projects going at one time, and a lot of these are much shorter term. So here's an example, for example, of just a really short-term project, right? So I think I did this like 3 years ago. I just wasn't very good at long exposures. So to improve my skills, I said, all right, well, let's get back to that structure that I need, right? Let's define the project. So the definition was just, I just want to take better exposures. But that opens it up to so much stuff. So I limited it. I said, all right, well, lots of things move. I could do car trails. I could do star trails. I could photograph, I don't know, there's a number of things that move, but how about I just focus on water for this assignment? And then I committed to it by basically committing to myself and just saying, hey, anytime that you travel in the next year and you go somewhere where there's water, any kind of water, a river, a stream, an ocean, anything, you're going to take your tripod with you and your neutral density filters so that you can practice this. All right. So it was maybe a year, but that's kind of a shorter term project for me. Now, another short term one, this is very short. This was a day project. So I happened to be going to Berlin, and I defined my project as just getting reacquainted with my tilt shift lens. So if you don't know what a tilt shift lens is, it's kind of a special kind of lens that you can use primarily for architecture, and it actually helps you straighten buildings. But I use it in a little bit different of a capacity. I usually use it to throw things out of focus. So you'll notice in a lot of these images, there's just a small sliver of the photograph that's actually in focus. And like I said, I limited it to just one day, and I committed to it by actually extending my trip to Berlin for one day. So that kind of created like a financial investment or incentive for me to do the project. So even when it was raining, it was like, no, I just have to get out there and do that. All right, here's another one. I guess this is a medium time frame project, going to Antarctica. The planning and saving up for the trip, I would say, took quite a long time, but the actual trip was only 10 days. So I knew when I went there that what I really wanted to do was create a book project. And so that was the definition. That's how I defined it, or the self-assignment. But in order to limit the scope, because I was only going to be there for 8 days probably of shooting, and I knew that I wanted to focus on the ice, not necessarily like the seals and the penguins or the continent or anything. It was just purely about the ice for me. But knowing that I was going to photograph for a book made me realize and make a shot list that said, hey, you don't just want those hero shots, right? You need all those supporting shots. So I tried to sketch it out, and I did a lot of research, but, and then in order to commit to it, I actually booked the trip, which was lovely and quite a commitment. Okay. So this is a much more recent project. I just finished at the end of last year. Oh gosh. Okay. So it's been a year now, but it's a medium time frame, I would say. And this is not about technique as much as it was just kind of a personal question. And that was, I was finding that when I went to some locations, I was much more successful taking photographs than when I went to other locations, and I was trying to figure out why. And what I started thinking was, I wonder if it has to do with the color palette of the location that I go to. So I started thinking, all right, well, let's see if every location that I go to has a color palette and if that affects how successful I am when I was taking those photographs. So I just defined this project. I was going to make 25 of these images from locations around the world, leveraging photographs I'd already taken, right? So I didn't have to go out and photograph anything. And I limited the scope because I only gave myself 6 weeks. And then I committed to it by promising the folks at Adobe that that they could do a blog, the social media team could do a blog. So that was a definite deadline in their editorial calendar. So, and if any of you are curious, I'll just go top to bottom, left to right. So the first image is actually of Copenhagen. The second one is of Kyoto. The second row then on the left, that's going to be Shanghai. On the right, that's going to be White Sands, New Mexico. And at the bottom left, we've got Phoenix, Arizona. And then the bottom right is going to be Glacier Bay in Alaska. So if like psychologically speaking, this kind of project really intrigues me. So I thought it was a fascinating project, and there's tons more about it on my blog that steps you through exactly how I do it and everything. So if you're interested in it, I thought it was really fun and might be something that you're interested in. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about Windows Seat. So while I'm passionate about this project now, or this assignment now, it was not like that in the beginning. In fact, it actually started as a way for me just to keep my sanity. So when I first took the job as evangelist, going out and speaking, I spent about 75% of my time on the road. So flying between different speaking and training opportunities. And when I first started, like the web wasn't really a thing, and remote learning or online training wasn't really readily available. You know, you could maybe buy a CD or a DVD and learn from that. But basically I was finding myself in like airports and hotels and cabs and convention centers and just kind of rushing around and not really being able to find something or uncover a project that I really wanted to work on. I also had another huge problem, and that was I am terrified to fly. I still am afraid to fly. I think it's just a lack of control thing. It's nothing that, it's nothing you can talk me out of. I've had so many people offer to help, but it's just that lack of control. It's an irrational fear. But I always kind of say, well, maybe it is a rational fear because, you know, it's like a big metal tube, like 30,000 feet in the air going like 400 miles an hour. Maybe it's not me that's weird. Maybe people who aren't afraid to fly, maybe that's the weirdness. But anyway, regardless, because I was afraid to fly, I had my camera with me, and one day I took it out and I kind of was trying to distract myself. And so I started taking pictures out the window of the plane. Now, today, I mean, so many people do this with mobile devices and everything. It's really not a big deal. But the images that you're looking at right now, like those were all shot on commercial flights with film, so back in the day, and then scanned in. But I really became, instead of participating in the flight, it's like I became this observer where I was just looking out the window into this fantastic scenery. I mean, it could have been a movie for all I cared. And so it really helped with my fear of flying. So that's why I say I wasn't very passionate about it in the beginning. Now, it was not a project that I intended to do, right? It just organically grew out of the situation that I was already in. So as I started building like this body of work, I decided to write a book. And that's how I defined, I would say, this project back in 2006. I had already kind of self-limited the body of work because I was only photographing, you know, while the plane was in flight. So it wasn't like I wasn't photographing like on the tarmac or anybody inside the plane, or, you know, when I was inside the airport, I was only photographing while I was flying. So that was kind of limiting it there. And then of course, once I got a publisher, that definitely committed me to deadlines and everything. It also kind of turned into a little bit of a different project. It wasn't quite as playful. It was a little bit more like work. And I felt like I really needed to kind of round out the images. I had a lot of clouds, but I didn't have a lot of landscapes. I had certain color images, but not others. I probably would have shot the project differently had I known that I wanted to turn it into a book. And it's not a coffee table book. The book's called Window Seat, obviously, and it's more of a 3-part series. It's about creativity. It's also about the photographs. And then it is a little bit about, it's all about the workflow. It's going from Bridge to Camera Raw and then to Photoshop. But, you know, Camera Raw, the technology in Adobe Camera Raw, if you don't know, is the same technology that's in Lightroom. So even though the book is about Camera Raw, it's all the same techniques and the technology that I would still use today. But anyway, I want to make a point here, and that is that this might seem like, oh my gosh, this is this great project and you had to fly, and you know, maybe it seems like, oh, well, I can't do this project because I don't fly. Well, none of us are flying right now, right? But the thing is, I was doing this like every week. And that's the important thing to take away from it, is that it was very tightly woven into what I was already doing in my life. So it's not like I had to wait for every 4th Thursday and, you know, try to travel somewhere when the weather was nice. I mean, I just got on the plane because that's what I was supposed to be doing in my life. And that's what I had access to. And I'm certain that all of you have projects and stories and unique things that you have access to, whether they're people or places, that you could all create a self-assignment and a personal project like this. It's just that, you know, the view from 30,000 feet was what I had access to as on a weekly basis. Okay. So one of the important things that I just want to mention, because I think it might help anybody who's got a larger personal project or self-assignment that they want to do, is that when I was making the book, you know, it's really nice because books are divided into chapters. So it automatically kind of breaks itself down. But I really had to break it down because otherwise I was getting way too overwhelmed with this whole book idea. So I wrote down, you know, all the things that I wanted to do. And then I broke them into these little small goals. And I've learned a lot about goals since then. And one of them is they've got to be realistic, right? They've got to be achievable. You don't want to set yourself up for failure with your goals, and they've got to be quantifiable. So, you know, if you take a different example, you know, or even with photography, you could say like, I want to be a better photographer. Well, that's a nice goal, but how will you know when you're a better photographer? You could say like, I want to learn how to do motion blurs. I want to learn how to do a tilt shift lens. Those are very specific tasks and skills that you can then check off. And once you check something off, it makes you feel like, you know, you've accomplished something, and that more goals are attainable. So break down your goals into some really, really small pieces and be super pragmatic, right? Because if you decide, hey, I'm going to take on this big project and it's going to take me, you know, an hour a day, or it's going to take me 3 hours a week, or, you know, 1 day a month, whatever that is, just know that that's probably going to be a trade-off, right? So you're probably using that time for something else, and it could maybe be for exercise. Maybe you're watching TV, whatever it is, gardening, social time, family time. You just have to figure out what the impact is going to be on your schedule, so you can kind of negotiate some terms maybe with the people that you live with, and try to figure out how you can push that project forward so that it doesn't always get put on the back burner. Because that's been my experience. You know, you may not have that experience. I'm just, you know, again, just trying to share what I've learned. So a few notes, just in case you're interested as far as capturing images. Now, this set of images, this is no longer film-based. These are all digital files. And another big change here, these are no longer commercial flights. So all of these, because I think I wanted a little bit more control, right? It's when you're on a commercial flight, you don't have a lot of choices as far as the flight path and that kind of stuff. So I started paying attention really to when I was booking my flights and what side of the plane that I wanted to sit on, because that makes a huge difference, right? You don't want to be shooting into the sun. So many people ask me, well, how'd you get such clean windows, you know? And it's just a trick. You just make sure that you're shooting at like f2.8 or f4, because you're focusing on stuff so far away, unless you're focusing on the wing or something. But most of the time, you know, the landscape, the clouds, they're really far away. So even though you've put your aperture to f4 or f2.8, everything's going to be in focus that you want it to be in focus. and the dirt on the window goes totally out of focus. So that's how you get rid of the dirty windows. I always wear black, right? Because there's always reflections and stuff. So I try to minimize them by wearing black. And then of course I try to sit in front of the wing, but that's not always possible. And it's not even always possible to get a window seat. So you just kind of have to roll with the punches. But you want to be in front of the wing because the ripples from the jet, well, maybe that's something you want. That could be another creative take on your window seat project. But I always tried to sit in front of the wing. And then because I wanted a little bit more control and I was hiring some smaller aircrafts, I made sure that whether it was a plane or a helicopter, that I could take the doors off. And you really have to watch like the lens and airstream. So, wherever the air can come in, it can really take your camera and kind of smack you around a little bit. So you just have to watch your lens and make sure you have good image stabilization. I mean, I don't have a huge rig for doing any of this work. This is just me with a Canon 5D and a really fast shutter speed. So it's been a really fun project. I'm glad that it's an ongoing project. I will say that some of the images have some heavy processing applied. Some of them have hardly any processing applied. But the way I look at post-processing is, the camera is a tool, right? And it helps you to create the image that you want. And I think the computer is a tool that can help you make the image that you want as well, right? Through software. I don't think it's cheating. I don't think there's anything wrong with it, unless you're a photojournalist, right? Then you have a completely different set of rules, right? So for example, Nat Geo Travel wanted to use some of my images, and I had to go back and make sure that I had not, enhanced those images or manipulated those images. I hadn't removed anything, because that was a use of that was more journalistic.
Julia,
so I want to show you a few of
Julia,
these. Yes.
Can you hear me? Just going to interrupt and let you have a sip of water for a moment.
Okay.
We're coming up to halfway through. I just wanted to let you know that I've got a lot of really cool questions coming in. I'm going to leave them till the end to ask you.
Okay.
If you could aim maybe at 10 minutes before the top of the hour, and we've been told that we can go over by 5 minutes or so as well. But I've got a lot of really good questions. So you've had your sip of water. You're doing an awesome job. Everyone's thanking you very much.
Thank you for monitoring those and letting me know that. Okay, excellent. So we'll take a few before and after. Here's just some before and after images here. So that's before. Oh, this is actually really cool. And the one thing that was really important to me was that I knew where all the photos were taken. So, like this was on film. So after I scanned it in, and I'd make sure that I, put it in the title and the metadata and stuff. So this is on the way down to Los Angeles from San Francisco. And if you talk to any pilot who flies that route, they've seen this kind of like horse unicorn. So that's the after image. So you can see there's been some enhancement, right, with tonality, a little bit of color, and a lot of contrast. Here's another one. This is as you turn into the San Jose airport in California. I just thought it was really cool because it almost looks like a eyeliner or some kind of makeup, kit that you would buy. Anyway, I thought that was a good one. This is flying into Salt Lake City. Again, a few dust spots there, but just enhancing it, really extending the dynamic range, right? Because when you're on a commercial flight and you're photographing through all those panes of glass, it gets very muddy and murky. Here's one just to remind you to always keep your sensor clean. It's almost too embarrassing for me to show you this one, but that's before and that's after. So thank goodness for the clone stamp tool in Photoshop. All right, and another one. This is leaving San Jose, California. And these are salt ponds that are out there that just turn these magnificent colors depending on the time of year. This one's crazy. I don't even think you could probably see what it looks like at first. This is going between Vancouver and Victoria up in Canada. I mean, look at that. So what you can pull out of an image in post is just absolutely fantastic. And I don't think it's cheating at all. Now, this one I'm going to pronounce incorrectly, but I believe it's Airlie, but I don't quite have the right accent. Beach. This was in a helicopter. I don't know if you can see on your screen, but there's two tiny little jet skis way down there at the bottom that I thought were really cool. And this is in Iceland. So this is actually a great example. So here's the original. And then this is what I did in Lightroom. So again, it's color and tone. but I don't really like the kind of pink hues that are in the water there. And I don't like all those rocks along the shore. So for me personally, you know, not if I'm going to publish this in you know, as journalism, but for me, I go ahead and I'll remove all of those little distracting elements, because this is just, as far as I'm concerned, it's art, and it's what I'm sharing. And here's the thing, people, you know, I don't care. I'm going to remove those distracting elements, because when I was there, I wasn't looking at them. I wasn't saying like, oh, look at all those tiny little pieces of rock that are really messing up my landscape. I was looking at this phenomenal water. And that's what I want to share with people, not like, oh, look at all these little imperfections. Oh, and here's another one. So this is going to be a housing development in Las Vegas. So again, that's what I would do in Lightroom. But, you know, I'll go in there and I'll just remove all of those little kind of weeds growing in there. So, but even though I do a lot of post-processing like this, I don't get lazy. Like, I want to make sure that I get as much right in camera as I can, right? And the cool thing about this whole project is that, you know, you never know where it's going to take you, right? So I'm afraid of flying. The next thing I know, I get this spark that leads me to take all these photographs. It grows organically. It turns into a book. I get gallery representation. I get an exhibition. The Hemispheres magazine from United wanted to write an article on it, which led to a show at the San Francisco airport. And, you know, it did help me because I published a book, I think, with credibility in the industry. And then, of course, there's a financial aspect of, you know, publishing a book and some print sales and everything. But I think the longevity of the project is truly based on just the fact that I love it. I mean, how fortunate and am I, and how grateful should I be that I actually get to see this view from, you know, most of them from 30,000 feet. You know, the smaller aircrafts, obviously, it's a lot lower. So anyway, I actually thought this talk, it's totally my bad, my fault. I thought it was 90 minutes at first. So I know that in the description, it says that I'm going to talk more about my Photoshop techniques. So what I did instead is I went online, because I have the window seat book. You can buy it from Amazon, I think, maybe used. I think it might be out of publication, but I updated it and I made it an iBook. And so I just put it free to the world from May 1st to May 8th. So anyone who's watching this, if it's May 1st to May 8th, you can go ahead and download that for free. And that gives you kind of a much more insight into my workflow. All right. Okay. So, because I would strongly recommend that when you're doing your self-assignments and your personal projects, that you publish them. Not like this. You don't need to publish a book. You don't need to make an iBook. Just print them. Print them, lay them out, look at them, rearrange them, try different sequences, see which ones you can live with for a month, right? Like after a month, you might not be able to live with all of them. This project made me much better at sequencing images. And it's just also encouraging when you print them and you lay them out, whether they're on your floor or your table or whatever, you see them and you can see what you've accomplished. Okay, so we better keep moving. So let's go to passenger seat. Again, this is all about kind of just making the most of the time that you have, because I know that we all have very full, very busy lives. So for the last few years, I've been visiting the East Coast to visit family over the holidays and driving. Well, I was riding in the passenger. Don't do this while you're driving. But we were looking for these iconic, you know, New England landscapes, which would be like the barn and the red barn in the snow and the horses there that are so beautiful. But you know, honestly, like I wasn't getting anything that I liked. And so I'm not very good at sitting still. And so in the car, I was getting a little antsy. And so I'm just playing with my camera and I decided I'm going to take some motion blur images. And I'd played around with it a little bit before, but I just thought I'm just going to pan out the window. Oh, I did try this when I came to Australia and it was very odd because I had to pan the other way because I was sitting in the other seat. But anyway, what I found was these images that I made in between, right? Like not the iconic landscapes, but these images were the ones that actually were resonating with me. Like they had a better mood to them. Like they conveyed a better mood. They were, I don't know. I just was much more intrigued with these than any of the other ones that I was photographing. So I started realizing, and I guess it's pretty obvious, I should have known it before, but you know, the camera can photograph things that are invisible to the naked eye, right? But that really caught my attention while I was doing this project. I mean, it's kind of obvious, right? Because you can shoot in black and white, you can do long exposures, all that stuff. But the camera's ability to see and record what was invisible to me kind of questioned my perception of reality, right? Like, that's pretty cool too. Like, think about that. You can use technology to completely change your perspective of how you see the world. So getting back to that whole structure thing, remember, I have to define the project. So I defined it, just learn everything you can about capturing motion in the camera. That was it. But then you have to limit it. So I limited it to like only nature, only wide open spaces. I didn't want to do this in the city. And I wanted to capture all 4 seasons. That was a goal. And then there was another really important aspect of this, because remember, I'm the passenger. And these trips were like 8 hours. And so you don't want to turn an 8-hour trip into like a 16-hour trip if the driver doesn't want to do that, right? And that's a lot to ask of someone. So I didn't allow go backs. So like if we drove by a house that had a spectacular lit up Christmas tree or a pumpkin or whatever it was, and I missed it, too bad. Can't go back. That kept it fun. It kept it light. It kept it playful, right? Which is super important, because when you're doing these projects, they kind of have to be fun. I mean, sometimes I struggle through them like anyone else, and they can be frustrating, but really I wanted to keep this fun. And then I committed to it by, watching a bunch of video and learning about motion and panning the camera and what settings to use. And then also committing to bring my camera obviously on a train and anywhere else that I was going. Okay, so keep moving, Julieanne. You got a lot to get through. I will just say the psychology aspect of it also kind of weighed in on it, because I was kind of wondering at that point in my life, like, wow, I seem to be just rushing through life. I'm just going from here to there and everything's so crazy. And so I started wondering, like, what am I missing, right? Like when we were driving at 60 miles an hour, what are you missing? Like, are you noticing things? Like, are you focusing on what's important and on the things that really matter? And so these images just made me think about that and think if I was blind to like what was right in front of me. So I just find it really interesting that as a photographer, the camera can ask the photographer questions as they're making the photo, because I think so often we focus in on like, okay, I made this photo, how is it going to affect the viewer? Well, it's kind of interesting to start thinking about, hey, as I make this photograph, like, how is it affecting me? And how is it affecting the world that I'm in? And how can I use it to maybe learn and grow and become maybe a little bit more self-aware? And in these images, I also just love the fact that there's kind of this, it's like a contrast between chaos and order in the same image. And that just works kind of well with my left and right brain. Okay, so the other thing that this taught me was, it taught me to question like everything I'd known about photography, which was how to make a good picture, right? Like, go get your tripod, set it up, put your camera on there, make sure that you're looking through the viewfinder and you're looking at all your edges and everything. What I really realized with this is like, it can be more playful. It really can, and it can allow you to see things that you wouldn't otherwise see. Now, I probably shot like 30,000 images for this, of which I probably really only like about 500 of them. So I'm really glad there's digital. Obviously, I could not have afforded to do this with film. And then the other thing is there's an infinite number of variables when you try to go out and shoot this. So if you try it, just be patient, go easy on yourself, because everything's interconnected, right? Like how fast the car is going, what direction the car is going. If the car is curving, when you pan, how fast are you panning? Are you panning the camera level when you pan it? What's your shutter speed? What's your f-stop? If you're on autofocus, what does it choose to focus on? But the cool thing about it is it allowed me to come much quicker with my camera and anticipate things. In addition, I always shot with one eye closed and just looking, through the viewfinder. And what this taught me to do is to have both eyes open, one eye looking forward out the car, and then transferring to the other eye as soon as let's say it was a tree, came to the window that was on the side of me. So I learned a ton of things about photography, and that's one of the best things about these self-assignments. So let's just move through a few of the before and afters. So I can't tell you how many images, of course, I had to crop and straighten because I wasn't panning exactly level with the ground. A lot of times though, all I needed to do was just add a little bit of contrast, maybe a little bit of saturation, maybe sometimes take some blue out of the sky. In this case, you're shooting up towards the sky. It's amazing how much color is in these branches, but you don't really notice them until you lift up the shadow slider in Lightroom and you kind of expose those shadows a little bit more. There were a few images that I definitely did some retouching on. Right, so this is one of them. You can see there's kind of that big streak that goes across in the blue area there. I just didn't want that, so I just kind of took it out. I also kind of burned down the edges there where there was a kind of a distracting element. So, and that's my whole goal with retouching, is really just to get rid of all those distracting elements. Here in the upper area, there's that triangle that's kind of funky, and then also that whole big kind of brown thing at the top is just a barn. So I just kind of wrong way. Sorry. So I just kind of extended it like that and just got rid of it so you could really focus on the three animals in the front. This one, love this. Oh, it took me forever to get one of these because the leaves are so small to get them in focus, but there's a house in the lower right, right? So just had to take that out. So again, I don't think it's cheating. I don't think it's cheating at all. So eventually I ended up having an exhibition, and then I ended up writing this book, Passenger Seat, all about personal projects. And it actually ended up getting me a gallery representation in Atlanta. So again, it's something that I did for probably 5 years. I'm not sure how much more I'm going to do. But again, it was what I loved to do. So I really enjoyed it while I was doing it. But some, you'll find that some assignments and stuff, even if they're long-term projects, sometimes they come to an end and it's totally fine. We don't want to do the same thing forever and ever, right? Okay. So the last project, the red thread. At the same time I was creating the motion blur images, and actually still even doing the images from the window seat, I realized though that I wasn't taking very many pictures on a regular basis. So if I was traveling somewhere, I was taking a picture, or if I was at a place that was photogenic, I was taking a picture. And being an athlete, that just triggered something in my mind that said, athletes work out every day. They don't work out once a month. They don't work out only when they're playing a game. So I thought I better start taking more pictures. So mobile photography was just starting to grow, right? And I do like to embrace new technologies. Sometimes the rapid pace of change can be a little bit overwhelming, but I do like to explore them. And there's no better way to explore them than with a self-assignment, right? Because they're non-threatening. There's no risk. It's just a self-assignment. So I started using my iPhone, and this was back in the day, right? This was back in the, when take a photo a day was super, super hot. So I jumped on that bandwagon, but I wanted to make it a little bit different, right? So I added to it. I defined the project as take 3 photos a day of the same subject or of a related subject. All right. They have to be related in some way. They can be related in the way that you apply a treatment or an effect to them. They can be the same subject matter. They can be the same color. It can have to do with food. It doesn't matter. It's just, I wanted to go beyond that grab shot, right? That you got to go beyond that initial shot. Just like when I was a teenager and I didn't want to photograph what my parents were photographing. I wanted to make sure that I got one image and then I researched the subject. I tried different angles. It's so easy with your mobile device. You just move the phone around. You don't even have to get up and get down, right? Some of these pictures really kind of crack me up now because look at those nice black borders. That's because I started posting these to Instagram, and Instagram worked really well. But before I go there, I'll just mention the reason it is called a red thread is because there was this Instagram filter that you could put on your images that would give this little red. You can see it in the first, second, and third images. There's a little red in the upper right. It would give this red thread, but there's a dual meaning with that too. And that is the red thread is the thread that's tying all of these events together throughout my life. All right. So let's just look at a few other images as well. So getting back to that red thread, it was actually quite fascinating because I never shot that many pictures of, kind of silly things like the kids next door who painted on the chalk out in front of them, or just driving down the road past a red barn in an artichoke field, or passing by a bowling alley. But the great thing is that they really work as memory triggers for me, right? And as I went and reviewed the year's worth of images, I really kind of got caught up in like, wow, like what is the relationship between, you know, where I was, what I was thinking, what I was photographing. And I realized that I make much better photographs when I'm alone. Now there's a few people that I can photograph with, but I'm terrible. Like if I'm in a big group, I'm much better. I need to get in my own little headspace. Remember that whole introvert thing, and photograph. And the other thing is, you know, when Instagram first came out, of course, it was all square. So shooting square just also helped me to really change my perspective. Now, I learned a ton about mobile capture, about mobile workflow. Today, I'm using the Lightroom app in order to capture images. And I'm also using just, you know, my regular camera, my SLR, and then I'll sync photos using collections in Lightroom Classic so that I can access them on my mobile device. And Paul actually has a talk about that he'll be giving. So be sure to check that out. But I also just want to mention, let's see how we doing on time. Okay, I've got about 4 minutes. I just want to mention that as you work through the self-assignments and the self-projects, there's a few things that you might want to just think about, and that is how you work best. Like I'm giving you advice that I think worked for me and helped me. But for example, like I'm a morning person. If you're not a morning person, don't plan your projects in the morning, right? Like I need to carve out time, like blocks of time. I get easily distracted. So I need a block of time where I shut down my phone and I shut down my email and I can actually work on these projects. I need my workspace super tidy. Like I can't work in chaos. I can't work with drama. So, you know, it's so funny because right now there's all these hashtags like be creative online and everything. I'm like, you know, like I just need to be tidy right now. Like I just need to not become overwhelmed and not have more drama. So I make lists. I make a lot of lists. I use Evernote to do that, just to sort things out and to remind myself what I need to do, especially with projects, because you might not be doing them every day. And if you're not, you don't want to have to keep them in your head. Like, where exactly was I? Just write it down so that you can free up your brain to do other things and process and just kind of let go of those things, knowing that you can come back to them because you have them written down. I also need 8 hours sleep. I don't know why I bring that up, because I'm giving everyone permission out there that doesn't get 8 hours sleep that it's important. I'm a nicer person when I get 8 hours sleep. That's how I justify it. Everyone wants me to be a nicer person, so I'll get more sleep. And then also I have a ton of self-doubt. I really do. I think everybody does. And so there's a great quote by Stephen Pressfield that says, the counterfeit innovator is wildly self-confident. The real one is scared to death. And so I just always remember that, like, yeah, that's right. I can be scared to death. That's fine. That's part of my process. Like my anxiety and everything and my self-doubt is part of the process. And it's part of what drives me forward and drives me to do a better job at things. All right. So finally, I ended up needing to use a bunch of images and slideshows at some industry events. So I took those 3 photos a day and I pared them down to diptychs, because usually 2 images were better than the third one. So I dropped one of them. And the other thing that changed was Instagram used to show you all 3 images in a row. So if someone followed you, they'd see all 3 images. Now it's random. And I guess I could use a carousel to do it, but then you'd never know which one they're going to see first. And I kind of put them in the order I thought that I liked best. So again, that's just evolution, right? And this is technology evolving. And when it evolved, I thought, well, good, maybe that's a good time for me to stop doing that and start doing something else. But I will tell you, this project, out of all the projects that I've ever done, honestly, this one improved my photography the most because I did it every day. And you can see at the bottom, there's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. There's 8 books. So I did this for 8 years. And I'm telling you, you practice something for 8 years every day. You know, I missed a few days, and sometimes I would miss a weekend, and sometimes I'd get 6 photos from one day and I'd publish them on 2 days. That's okay. Like, give yourself a break. These are personal projects. They're self-assignments. And I'll tell you just one last study. Do I have time for this? 7:50. Okay. One last little study that I learned in psychology. I remember this. There was 2 classes. They were both pottery classes. And the instructor for the first class said, okay, So you're new to throwing pots, to ceramics, and your entire grade is going to be based on how many pots you throw. So you throw 100 pots, you get an A, all right? And then the second group, his second class that were also all beginners, he said, all right, so your grade is going to be made or based on one single pot. Like, so make the perfect pot. And it turns out that the class that was encouraged to make 100 pots, as they were beginners, they were learning a ton more and much quicker, much faster. And the quality of their work actually was much better than those that were kind of like tightly constrained and just said, you know, like try to make something perfect. So I just thought that was kind of interesting. All right, so self-assignments, I think you've got it by now. Before we wrap up though, it's define the project, limit the scope, and commit to the plan. That's what really, really helps me. And then just 5 quick tips. Remember how I told you, like, you have access to unique things that other people don't. So think about making one of those your project or your assignment, because those things are so woven into your life that you can access them and you can move them along. And then don't forget, there's many types of assignments, right? So they all have different time frames. So have a few projects going, because one might stall out. You might get, you know, disinterested in it, and you can always switch to something else. And then if you get overwhelmed with a project, break it down into teeny tiny little pieces. You know, like, it's overwhelming. It's the end of the year. It's the holidays. I didn't want to make a slideshow or a book. Lay out 2 pages today. Pick 6 images. Make it super small so that you can check it off and you can feel like you keep moving that project along. And then if you tell somebody, like if you have a community or a friend or a partner or whatever, you can tell them about your project. It can really help. You know, and they don't even have to like your work. They can still support your work, but it can help you to have someone that you have to be accountable to. Just on that one, just be careful of social media. And the reason that I say that is that, you know, it's important to know whose opinion matters to you. I think, especially in today, because, you know, I can get a lot of, it's funny because I'll post a lot of images on Instagram, but the ones I like don't necessarily get the most likes. And maybe it's because they're being seen so small, or maybe, you know, it takes a minute to actually see like the secondary subject, or maybe they ask a question or something and someone just moves right by them. So just know whose opinion matters to you, and have, you know, have confidence in your own work. And then finally, just be sure to celebrate those little milestones, and be sure to celebrate the project when you are done with it. So, so with that, I will just put up a little thank you for coming today. And then Paul, shall I take some questions?
Sure, Julieanne, absolutely awesome as always. I have 1,000 questions here, so you're going to have to limit. I know your answer. I could ask you one question and you're going to spend the next 15 minutes answering it. So I wonder if you could put up the screen, first of all, for the link to the book. We're going to throw it in the chat box as well, I think, but if you could put that up, a lot of people asking for that, that'd be great. Yeah. So I've got a lot of questions. I'm going to jump part of the way through to start with one, which I think it's probably the one that I can help answer. There's from Annie, a serious question. I feel like I would drive people crazy if I was taking photos on the entire road trip. How do you balance that? Now, I'm going to jump in there because I've been lucky enough to be on a number of photo trips with Julieanne over the years. And I've been the driver as Julieanne is waving her 70 to 200 mil lens out the window. And it's that part itself doesn't drive me crazy. It's the fact that she's waving this thing around like crazy, takes a shot, looks at it, and then goes, yes. And I look at it and taken this absolutely incredible image by just throwing around. Anyway.
It's the fun part, right? You know, sometimes, and then sometimes I'll shoot like 30 in a row and they're all terrible. And then all of a sudden I'll be like, yes, nailed it. And Paula, they'll be like, really? And I'm like, no, it's horrible, but I just need some kind of motivation at this point because they're all really bad.
So,
So
Julianne
yes,
and
you
I,
might go crazy. You might also knock out the window. So you have to, that's why I'm saying, like, watch out for reflections. I would actually bring a towel and everything. And then I would, because there were shiny chrome inside the car. And so I would cover those with a towel. And I think I just have very patient drivers because they knew what I was doing. And otherwise, like, I'd be singing or something. So I'm sure they probably appreciated just the click of the camera instead of the singing or something.
We're still friends after many years of doing photo trips. So, okay. So I'm going to jump down. A bunch of them were, some were about the technology, use your camera gear, stuff like that. A number of them about when you're shooting in the plane, when you're shooting through windows. First of all, how do you get a better shot through a window? And then how do you process that? Just quickly on that, very quickly.
Okay, so how you get the shot through the window is you want to make sure that your aperture is either 2.8 or 4 or 5.6, as low as it can go there. And then you want to make sure that you hold the lens really close to the window, right? So that you're not getting the reflections. Otherwise, you'll get like reflections of light and all that stuff. And then, you know, it just depends on where you're flying and who's around you. You know, a lot of times I wear all black. I'll take a fleece or something and I'll make sure that, you know, my sleeves are covering my hands so I don't get those reflections. Yeah, those are kind of the main points. Yeah.
You told an interesting story once that it was a lot easier in an airplane before 9/11, and after that you had to.
It really was, because, you know, you could kind of cover your face and cover the window with a jacket. And now I just don't do that. I just don't want to make people feel uneasy.
Yeah, cool. I'm going to ask you some more questions, but because we're coming up close to the time and some people may want to drop out, I'm just going to let them know Julieanne and I are going to be back exactly this time tomorrow, midday Sydney time. We've got a joint session together called Turn Left, Turn Right. It's a lot of fun. It's also sort of talking about how different photographers can take images in different directions, but also learning Lightroom as we go. So a bit of a plug for that one, Julieanne.
I think that's perfect, because if there were a lot of questions about processing and everything, if you want to join us tomorrow, Paul and I will show you exactly how we process all the, you know, the using profiles and the sliders, you know, when to use the basic panel and all of that in Lightroom tomorrow. So that would be awesome. We'd love to have you back.
Cool. Okay. There's so many questions. I'm just going to start going through a bunch. So we just need some quick sort of responses. I know that's a bit unfair, but with the time limitation, do you have other creative outlets or projects outside of photography?
I do. I love to garden. It's just something I've always done. I'm also very active.
Renovating the house?
Sorry? You
renovated the house too?
I did. I gutted an old craftsman house, which you might actually be able to see on the video. Yeah. So anything. The thing is, when I'm always working with technology, you know, because I do work for Adobe and it's a software company, I just find I need to do something that's a little bit more hands-on. So I do some encaustic painting, which is painting with wax. I haven't done it in a while, but I love cooking. I love actually making things.
Okay. When you're doing personal projects, do you do one at a time? Have you got a number on the boil at once?
I have a lot going on at once so that I can shift, because sometimes you know, like obviously right now where I'm not flying anywhere. So I need to make sure that I have other things that I can do. And you know what, right now I would just say there seems to be a lot of pressure online. Like, now's your time to learn a new skill and be more productive and get more creative and do all that stuff. And I kind of having a little bit of a hard time with that myself. So I actually started another project, and I'm calling it a springboard project. And you know how, like, a lot of us, we probably keep journals, or we used to tear, you know, photos out of magazines, or now we take screenshots of things that we see that inspire us. I'm actually trying to kind of replicate some of these inspirational photographs that I love, but then put my own twist on it, you know, because it's a great way to learn and expand your skill set. Like, there's things in Photoshop I don't use very often, and this is getting me back to trying to use some of the different features. And you're just adding more tools to your toolbox, right? It's not like I would ever take these images and try to publish them. It's just a way for me to learn. But the nice thing about it right now is that I'm not having to come up with the initial creative idea. I'm trying to learn skills, but I'm using someone else as a springboard. in order to kind of spark and ignite my creativity. And I think sometimes, you know, if you're in a rut, or if you're just feeling like, you know, right now it's a tough time, and there's some folks, you know, that are really affected by this. And if that's you, my heart goes out to you, because, you know, maybe don't put more pressure on yourself right now to be more creative. I just think that might lead people down the wrong path. So just find something that's fun, that's interesting, that you can do, and make it playful. Like that's what these self-assignments and these projects should be. You can learn from them, obviously, but you can also just play and just, you know, for me right now, this is really a time to be creating content and not just consuming content.
That was an awesomely short answer. Thanks, Julieanne. So my next one for you, Leslie asking, obviously a lot of the stuff that you've been showing is when you've been traveling around. Do you find it easy or difficult to be inspired where you are? What are some tips maybe about, because obviously at the moment people are sort of locked in. So what are your thoughts on that?
So I think that if you notice with the 3 images a day project, a lot of that stuff was very local. So every morning I try to get up and take a walk. Right now here in the US, you know, we've got stuff in bloom, but it should be nice and fall there. So there's things to photograph everywhere. And I think it's a really great exercise. I mean, instructors do it all the time in school to, you know, you got to stand in one place and make 10 photos. And it's just a great way to kind of exercise the creativity and kind of flex your brain a little bit and try to look at things from a different perspective.
Cool. Okay, some of the ones are basically people who missed something that want to go back, but the recording is available. So you will have a link later once it's published to the recording of it. So I'm not going to go through those questions. If it was something that was said, you hopefully can go back and find that. A lot of questions about camera gear, shots, aperture, settings, all of that sort of thing for the different styles that you do. Just on camera gear in general, obviously you've done that whole project with mobile phones, you've done one with DSLR. What are your thoughts on gear in general?
You know, it really depends on the project. One of the nice things about the 3 photos a day project is when I decided to do that, I said, okay, I'm going to do it on my camera phone, and I'm only going to post these online. And the reason I did that was to give myself permission and to not get all caught up with, oh my gosh, my camera phone, this is 5 years ago, 7 years ago, the resolution's so poor. You know, figure out a way that you can use whatever technology you have in the best way that you can. So for that project, it gave me a sense of freedom to just say, well, it's just going to be online. I'm not going to worry about printing it, because then I would have had to take my other camera with me, and then I would have never done the project. I usually shoot with, I have a Canon 5D with a couple different lenses. You know, I have that tilt shift lens, I have a zoom, and I have a sort of wide lens, but not super wide. You know, as far as recommending camera gear, it's whatever feels comfortable in your hand, I think I think that's super important.
Okay, thanks, Julieanne. Look, we're just coming up to the end of time. Folks, I wonder if in the chat pod you could give your thanks to Julieanne. I'm capturing all of that to share with her later.